Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We have a great show for you today. We are about 2 weeks out of the new generation of the Mustang being revealed. We're going to talk about some of our favorite Mustangs over the years. Plenty of stuff to dig into on there, plus ones that we might want to spend some money on, so to speak. Some news this week. We have interesting things about rumors of an electric Acura NSX, and then we're going to talk about what might be the next great resto mod, perhaps following all those years of the Bronco, when we didn't have a Bronco, and some of our friends would like sort of make them for us, if you would, in the kind of sort of aftermarket. But there is a Bronco, so you can have a real new Bronco. What's next? I drove the GMC Yukon Denali Ultimate, I should say, and Jeremy has driven our long-term Kia EV6. With that, I'll bring in Senior Editor for all things consumer, Jeremy Korzeniewski. How are you?
I am doing all right. The leaves are starting to fall off of the trees, which means it is officially fall, my favorite season of the year. So all in all, doing all right.
I agree. Fall is my favorite time. I feel like last week was officially fall on Thursday at I think 9:04 p.m. It feels to me like we're really into October. It's still September 27th. We're recording this. But it's cold, I would say. It is 55 degrees and overcast. Like, I was in shorts. A week ago, I golfed and it was 90 degrees. So the seasons have changed. We'll probably get a little bit of a warm up here in a bit. We always do. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. Good reason to put on a Patagonia vest and sit in the sunroom and enjoy it. So Let's talk Mustangs. You compiled a list of the best Mustangs. This is... we like to compile lists. You guys like them, the readers and the listeners. We like to do them. This is a list of the best Mustangs of all time, which we compiled. We welcome your feedback and what you think. Lots of greatest hits on here, from the 69 Cobra Jet, the GT500, the Shelby GT350, one of my favorites. Plenty of the greatest hits on here throughout the ages. Tell me your approach to compiling this list, Jeremy.
Well, you know what? Initially, when I started doing it, I thought, man, should I do this by generation and pick out the best Mustang of its contemporary generation? But then the more I started looking at the greatest hits, the more I realized that a lot of them kind of piled up in various model years. While I personally don't subscribe to there is no good Mustang 2, I didn't want to let the inclusion of something like a mid 70s Mustang 2 Cobra knock out, something that really deserved a spot on the list. Say a Mustang SVO or something like that. The other thing that I thought was interesting is looking back on Ford Mustang history, all of the greats carry similar badging. It starts off with Shelby's, Boss's, SVO, which turned into SVT. And then, you got the Cobra name back, you've got the Boss name back, so it just became clear really quickly that there's so much heritage, in the Ford Mustang line. Since its debut in 1964 as a 1964 and a half model. It's really difficult to have to leave out such good, really deserving models when you're making a best of list. But if you just covered everything, you'd have a list of 25 cars and it wouldn't feel as meaningful.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm curious too, as you look at just the different generations, there's so many different icons, if you will, like the names that we'll go over, like the SVO, the Boss, the Cobra. Hey, we're going to have the Dark Horse come out too. They're going to add to the pantheon, if you will. One thing I will say, and this is I think the beauty of the Mustang, is sort of the daily driver, the basic V8 car. For your daily driver person, I mean, it can be just as good a car as a Boss 302 Laguna Seca for its own purpose. So I think that to me is sort of the essence of the Mustang too.
Yeah, growing up as a child of the 1980s, just a standard, run of the mill, late 80s Fox body Mustang GT with the 5-liter V8 and a manual transmission it still holds an amazing appeal to me. Like, it was the car that, everybody wanted when I was in high school. Everybody wanted a Fox body Mustang GT. It does make me feel a little bit old, reading through the comments. There was someone who said something like, why did you include these, 80s and 90s Mustangs? They don't even look like Mustangs. And I was like, that makes me feel real old, because when I think Ford Mustang, that's exactly what I think of. Like, my body, or my brain immediately goes to the Fox body, and specifically the Fox body GT with the 5-liter. Like, that is the Mustang in my mind. But I'm sure that's generational. Someone who was born in, say, 2000, like literally 20 years after I was, are going to think of these, the 2010 to 2015 era as the quintessential Mustang. Someone my dad's age is going to remember the 69 and 70 Mustang as, the high water mark. So, and that backs up, it's a tenuous claim that Ford has the longest tenured sports car, brand or nameplate or whatever. I mean, there's some others like Corvette that they're getting by on a technicality there. But it lends some credence to the idea that the Ford Mustang has, so many generations, so many fans. And you were there with me at the 7th Gen launch. You walked in off the street and you were immediately bombarded with these like great Mustangs of so many different generations. It really is an icon of American, the American automotive scene.
Yeah, and I will almost say this. Sometimes with cars involved, also with like sports, there's some similarities, if you will. Like, cars from the 60s and 70s, they're older, they have that iconic styling. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. Sometimes we remember things as we want them to be, or how we thought we remember them, as opposed to how they actually were. But I mean, these were great cars. And I do think some of the 60s and 70s do stand above, like the Mustang 2 or even the Fox bodies, which I really like. And then some of the like the later 90s before they went back to the retro look. Like, I think you can sort of say that, even though some of the more like Gen X cars do have their favorites, their enthusiasts, their rightful, I think, supporters. It is tough to beat like the first gen car though, or some of those early 70s cars. So,
and honestly, I mentioned this real briefly off the bat. There's a lot of people, like the Mustang 2 has such a like dead reputation among enthusiasts, and I don't feel like it's deserved, honestly. It was a car of its time.
Yes.
Like, that's the vehicle that Ford had to make, and customers responded. They sold tons of those things throughout the 1970s after, and like, take a look at some of the 60s and earlier 70s Mustangs. And, the Mustang wasn't solely about performance. It was also about style and, making a personal statement. And, it was the same story maybe 20 years ago with the later 70s Pontiac Trans Ams. They were, shells of the performance car that they were from, 1969 through 1974. From 75 to 81-ish, the performance was a far cry of what it used to be. But again, it was a car of its time. And now they're super popular, and you can't touch a, 77, 78, 79 black and gold Trans Am for a reasonable price anymore. And when I was a kid, they were practically giving the things away because everyone thought that they were terrible. I think the Mustang 2, especially like the interesting things like the Gias, the Cobras, the Mach 1s, with the V8, the only reason they're so low in performance is because they're choked. you put some different heads on them, bump up the compression a little bit, and feed it fuel and air, and that engine will still respond just like the earlier 60s and 70s ones will. And they're never going to be worth so much that you would feel bad doing that. Like, oh, I have to keep this thing original. You don't. I would totally buy a 77 or 78 Mustang 2 Cobra and uncork it a little bit and have a blast with it. But anyway, I digress. We talked about this a little bit ago, the generational performance gap. We'll touch on the Kia EV6 that I'm driving a little bit later in the podcast, but it's a 14-second quarter-mile car. We're talking about like these great, epics of performance Mustangs, and a lot of them would be outrun by the Kia four-door electric hatchback. So if you're basing it solely on performance, you might have to rethink that a little bit. And so that's why I also err on the side of collectability and, just kind of like performance versus its contemporaries when I'm picking bets.
I think that's a really fair point on the Mustang too, because I remember growing up, a lot of, one of my aunts and uncles, actually, I remember that one had a red one had a blue one. And it was like, by the time like I was cognizant of this, the 80s had kind of taken root, if you will, and the Fox bodies were out there. And these were like sort of like the crappy Mustangs from the mid to late 70s. But with a little bit benefit of hindsight, and they had some issues too. Like, yes, the performance wasn't there. There was some quality issues, like Ford, frankly, and a number of like the domestics struggled with in the late 70s. But, with the benefit of hindsight, when like we were standing at that reveal and I saw some of them, it's like, I like how they look. It's almost like a European styling. They did come with a V8. It was definitely an approach to making the Mustang, I mean, dare I say, a compact car, which, before it had been something, a bit different, if you will.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are generations that will probably never get their due, but definitely deserve, like,
they deserve to be remembered.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It reminds me a little bit, like you mentioned the Trans Am. I think the same thing about some of the Chevelles. I personally like the mid-70s Chevelles. I own one, technically. But that it was a car of its time. It looked differently because of the regulations that, rolled out in 73 as opposed to what a 71 or 2 Chevelle would have been. So, that's the history of the Mustang. It is kind of funny that they claim longest running sports car when the Corvette rolled out in 53.
It's because there was like a gap where they didn't actually label certain model years. Even though you could still buy a brand new Corvette off the showroom floor, it technically was a previous model year. And so they skipped one in there. I don't even remember what year it is. Like, what is it? 91 or something like that. I don't remember. I think it's in the 80s. It's like one of the early 80s years. I think they skipped like 1983 or something like that. But regardless, it's a dubious claim. But when you're talking Mustang Corvettes, I'm not sure that it really even matters.
It's a lot like a lot of college football teams claim these national titles, and then you look it up, and it's like, well, actually, they finished third in the poll, but this one other polling service that sort of counts, and then they hang up a banner and all that stuff. So
Alabama does a lot of that. As an Ohio State fan, I can point fingers at Alabama and say they claim a lot of national titles.
I actually read a piece on this side note about some of the ones they claim that are particularly sketchy. Like there's one year in like I think the 50s where they finished like in the teens or something, and they're still counting it. So it's like I don't know about that. But
and the old Minnesota national champions from like 1916 or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, they played 4 games, but
right.
They won all of them, and
right.
They were
one of them was
champions.
Like a high school team or something, and
it's kind of funny. Anyway.
All right, so let's transition. So check out the list first of all. Great list, very interesting. We'll be resurfing this for a while because it's the best Mustang. So why wouldn't we do that? Real quick, I did a piece on the Fox bodies. Basically, on my walk from the auto show last week to the Mustang reveal. And to me, I think this is just like almost like a little pull-out breakout here. I think they finally are getting their due. And I don't think they're going to be lumped into the same crowd, if you will, as like the Mustang 2 or that sort of late 90s, early 2000s generation. I feel like the Fox bodies, at some point, they're never going to be like first gen cars, and they're probably not going to get into the ranks of these like last couple, which are like high powered retro, Gen 5 and Gen 6, I think are going to go up in that pantheon of like Hall of Fame Mustangs. Don't think the Fox bodies are going to like get above that, but I do think they're going to be like truly collectible cars that are desirable. And I think enough time has passed where I think you and I are both like good like test cases for this, because we remember how desirable the Fox body Mustangs were in the 80s and early 90s. And then you probably also remember like by, the late 90s, like high school, then into college, Fox body Mustangs were also kind of like beater cars. It'd be like, your friend Steve would be driving one and the door was rusted out because he got it for $1,000. And it's like, hey, he wanted a Mustang, but it was a real piece at that point. So I think we like literally lived through the evolution of it. And now we're seeing them kind of come out the other side, where the ones that have survived, and they made a lot of them, can be, getting that more like legendary status, if not mythical.
Yeah. There's something pretty special about seeing a white on white Mustang 5-liter, GT
Yes.
convertible.
Yes.
Makes you want to spike your hair and blare some Vanilla Ice out of the speakers. Yeah. Or like, one of those crazy aquamarine or teal, Mustang GTs or convertibles or something like that from the 1990s. Like you pull up to Radwood in that and you're going to have a crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One of my neighbors has a white on white, and I try to walk the dog up and down his sort of cul-de-sac just to look at it. It's pretty cool.
That is cool.
All right. So real quick, where do you think this newest generation, Gen 7, you think it's, I don't know. I tend to throw it in with the 5th and 6th. Mm-hmm. Like that's where it's going to be. They're going to all be kind of like mushed together as like part of the greats, the near greats. But we'll see.
So I have a few thoughts here. One, Ford is calling this a legitimate generation, a 7th generation Mustang. And they changed a lot. They re-sculpted the body. They altered the suspension. They did some things to it. It's got a brand new interior. It's like the high-tech screens everywhere style. We talked about it right at the debut in Detroit. I think it's a really cool car. I think you're right. It's going to be lumped in with the 5th and 6th generation, because, Ford PR was kind of going on a little bit of a tirade on Twitter when journalists and other people were suggesting that really it's a 6.5 generation. But in reality, there's truth to that. It is not a completely brand new clean sheet design. It's highly altered, but I think that's okay because the 6th generation Mustang is great. Like, I think it's the wrong take to say like 6.5 is a bad thing. It's instead better to think this is the culmination of all the improvements they've made to the 6th generation. We can call it a 7th gen. We can call it a 6.5. It's semantics. It's going to be a great car to drive. I am not sold on the dark horse yet. When I was compiling this list of best ofs, it seemed a little bit surprising to me that they decided to roll out this kind of new take on the above GT performance level when they had so many different options to choose from. But that's sentimentality speaking in all reality. When someone goes to the dealership, when they walk the showroom floor, they're going to see that dark horse Mustang. They're going to realize that it's a step above the GT, and they're going to want it. And I think it's pretty cool. I do like the color. It's like this gray battleship blue. I don't even know exactly how to describe it. It's like a blue, green, gray color. When they showed it initially at night I didn't like it. I was like, well, that doesn't look very interesting. But then it just looked battleship gray. But then I saw it actually on the showroom floor the next day and took pictures of it. And it's a much more nuanced color than I realized. It has a lot of like metal flake in it. And I think that will be a hit. I think people are going to like the color. The dark horse badging is a little bit, I don't know. It's not really my thing. But I think it's going to be an absolutely brilliant car to drive based on what I know of it and the guts that it's built on.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think that's a very fair take. I feel like they kind of have to call it a 7th generation for advertising and marketing purposes. And I think it's one of those things too, where sometimes you get a more vociferous response when they like sort of know they're wrong. Like it's the same chassis, right? So they kind of know, like, yeah, it isn't exactly a full Gen 7, not how they've done it in recent years. Let's put it that way. So it's one of those things where, like, sort of when you call somebody on something, they get a little defensive. Is it legit to call it a Gen 7? Yeah, maybe-ish, because when you go through all of the things they changed, well, they changed a lot. On the other hand, like the thing that you sort of need to change to make it a new generation, they didn't really do. I tend to think this is going to end up, because it's the final part of the final chapter in the traditional Mustang, it will rank well. And I think some of the dark horse, I think, is just the beginning. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff like that really make this a cool thing that people are going to love and remember and keep.
Yeah. Are they going to like really go out with a bang? And like, are they going to do another Shelby GT 500? I think the answer is probably yes. They've hinted at it. And boy, what are they going to do to outdo the current GT 500? That'll be interesting. But we're talking, the upper echelons of performance, and it's still really cool to me that there is an attainable muscle car for, new college grads or, people can actually aspire to own a Ford Mustang GT. And it's just such a brilliant car with the current 5-liter V8. They kept the manual transmission. Not that, I'm not throwing stones at people who choose the auto. That's fine. It's actually probably the quicker car. But they've kept this tradition alive, longer than any of its competitors, are going to be able to do. And kudos to Ford for making that happen.
All right. So we're going to spend some money a little bit earlier in the podcast. We're going to call this the 20, 30, and the 20, 40, and $60,000 challenge. 3 price points. You can spend your money on these cars. Which Mustang do you get? I will lead off. This is the $20,000 price point. I think there's 2 different ways you could go. One is coming in exactly at 20 grand. I'm seeing this on Auto Trader. It's pretty close here. It's just right off Woodward and Ferndale for 6,000 miles on the clock. It is a V6, ruby red metallic, beautiful car. Just a Mustang coupe, hardtop coupe, 2015, $20,000. You can drive this for quite a few years to come. It still looks very contemporary because it's, the 2015 car. It's different than how it, has evolved in the last 6-7 years. But I really think this is a good deal if you're just like looking to have a fun car for, the next maybe 3-4 years. So I would go that's one option. Then I'll split this up a little bit. My other option is I would go with a Fox for 20 grand. I think Fox body Mustang for right about 20 is the sweet spot. You get above that, I think you really need to get like something special, if you will, to justify like an 86 Mustang for like 30 or 40. You may disagree. I think that's great. But I found one on Car Guru's, 93 GT hatchback, rear wheel drive, of course, for 15. So you'd save some money and maybe do some modifications or upgrade it. This one's basically all black, looks really good. It's a V8, has a manual. It's got 75 on the clock. So, this is what I would say is sort of a daily driver collectible. It'd be a fun summer car. Maybe you're paying a little bit more, but I don't know, 14, 15 grand for a fun summer car. I think that's a good deal. I would definitely go GT at this price point. Fox Body GT. So those are my two for 20 grand. What would you do with your 20 grand?
I found so I should preface this by saying I gave priority to vehicles that I personally chose on my list of best Mustangs of all time.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so I found an 85 Ford Mustang SVO. That is the 2.3 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder,
Nice.
manual transmission, rear wheel drive. It's the kind of, I don't know, the ducted hood, the twin level spoiler out back. Like, it was Ford's first attempt to make a kind of European flavored Mustang.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not the first attempt, because there was the Gia in the 70s. But like, this was a performance car. It basically matched the performance of the 5-liter V8. But it did it with a much more interesting, interesting recipe, so to speak. Also significantly lighter. The 2.3 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder was a lot lighter than the 302 V8. And the SVO was the best handling Mustang of its era. But basically I chose it because I think it's got some legitimate collectability factor, baked in. For 20 grand, you could either go daily driver, which I don't think would be a bad choice at all, or you could take a flyer on something like this SVO. You could still obviously drive it as much as you want to. But the one that I found is relatively low mileage. It's in Laverne, Tennessee, currently for sale, right near that $20,000 mark. So yeah, that's what I went with.
Sounds good. We'll jack things up to 40 grand. I went with this. To me, I think is somewhat in keeping with my first choice. This is a 2022 Ford Mustang GT. This has the V8. You can build and spec it right now on the Ford site. I went with carbonized gray metallic, which I think is a really good look. It has the painted black roof, black wheels. I went with the GT standard equipment group, if you will. So, and the black accent package, which was about $1,200. So this is how I've always liked a contemporary Mustang, which is sleek, understated. I particularly like Mustangs and Jeeps, actually, like in different shades of kind of like gray with black wheels. That's just a look I like on a number of different cars. And that gets me in. It includes cloth bucket seats. So it's a little bit of a basic interior. And of course, I think I said it as the 5-liter V8 with the 6-speed manual. And that gets me in at, let me scroll all the way down to my build so I can give the exact number. The low price of $40,635, including destination. So I skid in about $600 over, but whatever. $600 among friends, who cares? So that's what I would do. I would spend 40 grand to get a brand new Mustang. You get the V8, you get the manual. This is how I want it to look. Maybe make a little bit of a compromise on the pretty basic interior. I don't care. This is what I would do, and I feel pretty good about it. This is a car I would totally buy and own and enjoy for the rest of my life.
Yeah. We're going to call Greg's pick here the smart choice.
Okay.
That is what you should do for your $40,000 Mustang. I'm doing the dumb choice. I'm going 1964.5 Mustang. That is the very first year. There are some interesting little things in that half year, the 64.5, that make it more desirable than the 1965. That early half year was a kind of an oddity, and they are not particularly easy to find. I found one for $40,000 in Georgia. It is black with a beautiful red interior. It's an original 289 V8 car, and it's absolutely beautiful. Should you buy this for $40,000 instead of a brand new one? No, probably not, unless you've got a lot of free spending money that, it's just burning a hole in your pocket. And if that's the case, you should buy the one that I'm picking here, because probably it's going to increase in value as the years go on. Give it a decade, and I wouldn't be surprised if this kind of turned from a $40,000 car into a $60,000 car. That's just kind of like what happens with collectible muscle cars like this. So anyway, that's what I went with. Very first Mustang ever built. Desirable color combo, desirable engine, desirable options, and potential collectability adding on top.
I don't think you can go wrong for any of these questions with a first gen Mustang. I think it's still one of the most beautiful Mustangs as far as just aesthetically. It was very unique for its time. It had so many characters, Iacocca, Carroll Shelby, just all like Henry Ford II were involved with that car. I don't think you can go wrong with it, because I think you do get a little bit of that sort of like even late 50s to early 60s elegance with that car before it becomes more of this like hot rod thing later in the 60s. And I like I said, I almost felt weird making some of these picks and not finding myself with a true early example. But
yeah, it's clean, right? That first gen Mustang. Yeah, it is. Timeless is a good way to put it. The one that I picked, you can't get like it. The market is priced out of $40,000 if you want something that's like just absolutely fully original cream puff, low miles. Like you're not going to get that for 40 grand. This one, it's not. It's got later Mustang wheels on it. You guys can't see it, but I'll describe it for you. It's got like kind of the mag wheels of later Mustangs on it. It's been, I'm sure, repainted in its original shade of black. But, it's at enough originality points that it is, it's going to remain collectible. But it's already been, slightly changed over the years so that if you did want to kind of customize it the way that you like it, you're not going to feel bad doing so. So, yeah, I mean, I'd buy this car for 40 grand if I was in the market looking for something like this.
All right, sounds good. Well, speaking of the first generation, I did include first gen in my picks here. It wasn't sort of like, I would say, the iconic one, if you will. So I actually kind of have two. I was able to find a 1969. It was a convertible, which I don't know if I'd go that way. It was on classiccars.com, but the price was right. Beautiful red car, and it's $59,000 is the current price. So it's an automatic transmission. So, there's that. But it would be a lot of fun. I think a very enjoyable, again, sort of like, maybe summer car. It's got the 351 Cleveland V8, rally wheels, 4-speed automatic. It's the right car, the right budget. I think it could be a lot of fun. Then my other choice, sticking with the first gen, located in Rancho Cordova, California, with just 38,000 miles, we'll call it. This is a 71 Mach 1. Comes in at $59,888. So I feel like if you're going to spend that much money on a Mustang, I want it to have like a pretty good like history, some pedigree, if you will. So, I mean, a Mach 1, I think that fits out pretty good. This one's a beautiful shade of that blue from that era. It's just this would probably be my first choice, even though I sort of like how the 1969 model is a little bit of a cleaner look, and by 1971 it was just like a real muscle car. But yeah, I don't know. I think of the two, I would probably pick the 71 Mach 1. But if you want to go back a little bit, you could also get a pretty nice one from a couple years earlier. It's just a slightly different vibe. So that's how I would go with 60 grand here.
I like this 71 Mach 1 you found. I wish I could show you podcast listeners exactly what it looks like, but it's a beautiful medium blue. It looks like, this is the thing. When you're buying at price points, you have to make some compromises to hit like a budget that you're looking for. You can't get a 69 Mach 1 in original or restored shape for $40,000. You just can't. You have to get one like what Greg found, the red convertible that has a replacement engine, mated to a non-factory transmission, a 4-speed automatic instead of the original 3-speed C4, C6, whatever it was. You have to make compromises there. This 71 is a slightly less desirable year, but it's more original and it's really well done. And I agree with you. Of these two, even though the 69 is potentially more desirable, I like the 71 a little bit more at this price point.
Cool. Sounds good. Sounds good. Tell us about the 2004 SVT Cobra.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I kind of gave preference to vehicles that made my list of best, and I found the high water mark of this generation, the 2004 SVT Cobra, painted in beautiful Mistachrome paint. If you don't know what Mistachrome is, take a look at our article and you will see it. I found a 2004 for $59,500. It's in Milford, Michigan. Greg, maybe you should go take a look at it. They've made very few of these. The ad says 515. I'd have to look up to make sure that's right, but I think it is. The 4.6 liter supercharged V8 engine is known as the Terminator engine. It is extremely fast, extremely powerful, and everything that I want out of a Mustang. It's collectible. It is the high watermark of its generation. It is noteworthy. It lands on the best list. And yeah, I was a little bit surprised that I could find one this nice for 60 grand. But I think it's got a lot of upward momentum in potential collectability as the years go on.
One thing I think we both did with this list here is we zeroed in on like a generation or maybe genre, if you will, of the Mustang, and then found a car that fit the price point. And I think, initially I was thinking, well, maybe, a Fox body tends to fit more in this one, and then an older one fits over here. And that can be true, but, with your final pick here, you really underscored. If you want to spend 60 grand on a 2004 Mustang, you can do it. More power to you. And that 4.6 liter, that was also used in the Mercury Marauder. That was a heck of an engine. So
minus the supercharger, right? And the Marauder, it didn't have the. It was the 4.6 with the 32 valves. But yeah, throw that supercharger on, you make the Terminator. That thing was a beast of an engine. 12-second quarter-mile car. Yeah, that is really fast. And yeah, I looked it up. It was 515 Mistachrome coupes for 2004. So that number is accurate. And again, underscores the innate collectability of it.
Very cool. Very cool. So that is our Mustang special, if you will. If you are not a Mustang fan, welcome to the podcast. We're going to run through some news and some reviews at this point. You know what we will do? We can try to include some of these links. We have them in our show notes. We can probably throw some of them into the post. If you're listening, you can, head over to Autoblog and, you can find this in the podcast post. But we had a story last week, and this, I believe, will be the final Ford reference for the most part of the podcast, of the Velocity Modern Classics. They did an Ultralux F250. This is a 1970s, sort of reprisal, and it looks cool. It's a very cool resto mod. To me, this follows in the footsteps of Icon and a number of other companies that did Broncos for years and years. And everybody was like, oh man, this is the closest I could get to a new Bronco. Maybe they take the shell, they put new running gear, all sorts of things, and make it essentially a modern car that looks like an old one to varying degrees. But hey, now there is a Bronco, a new Bronco. You may still want to go the resto mod route, and that's great too. Or you want an original one. But the point is I sort of feel like some of that demand has been satiated, if you will. There are ways to get a real Bronco. So what do you think the next resto mod muse template canvas will be?
I'm going to say the GMT 400 trucks and SUVs. They're starting to gain in popularity right now, which I think is like a precursor to them hitting this like resto mod mark. Full disclosure, I own a 1993 Suburban, GMT 400 platform Suburban. And I wanted it. I wanted it on purpose. Like when I set out looking for something to buy, these were high up on my list. It was either this or a 90s Bronco, 80s or 90s Bronco. And I went with the GMT 400 because, it's a more practical daily driver, which is what we use ours for. I think these things are right on the cusp of potentially really moving from the people like these and are willing to pay slightly more for them into the like legitimately collectible range. And I think the two-door, like the Yukons, are probably most ripe, but also, the flare side pickup trucks were, pretty cool at the time. And, everybody likes a Suburban. So yeah, I mean, there's a big range. They're all based on the same platform. They're simple. They're, right on that era where computer controls were just starting to take over. So they're easy to modify. And I think they have a lot of resto mod potential.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's interesting when I was trying to rack my brain here about what's next. I think like the 70s, Ford trucks sort of piqued my interest, but I think we're already at the point where we're like post Bronco, if you will. And like 70s trucks are like, they're here. We saw it a little bit with the Ford Illuminator. General Motors has done some things too with some of like their greatest hits of the 70s. I think that's a really good canvas too, because you get like, it's a truck that while it does look tough, it does still have like it's a very retro looking truck. Like truck design took like an extra 10 years to catch up to where, the rest of the car industry went, I think. And some would argue it just went straight from the early 60s to the 80s. So, but I'm going to go a little different here. I could see like XJs, like Cherokees from the 90s, really, like a lot of the ones that are still out there are either really expensive or they're rusted, so I could start to see, businesses sort of crop up where they, they're like harvesting what's left of some of these and then building modern, modern Jeep Cherokees, if you will, with that sort of iconic XJ styling underneath. And then, the world is your oyster as far as the, the powertrain, there's all sorts of things they could do with it, make it like a modern 4xe kind of thing. But I sort of see a market for that, like somewhat coming up soon. At least I hope it does.
The XJ is a great choice. I think you're right. Like, I know someone, a friend of mine, his dad would only buy XJ Cherokees. Like when he'd, wear one out, he'd go out and find the very best one that he could and buy another one. He didn't want anything else. And he opined to me not long ago that they're not doable anymore. You just can't get them. People like that would be willing to pay $30,000, $40,000 for a resto modded XJ, exactly the way that they want it. And it, very well might be the last big automotive purchase that they buy. So bear with me here, Greg. When you said the XJ Cherokee and resto mods, the other day I was driving and I saw a Jeep Comanche, which was the pickup truck version of the XJ Cherokee. If we have some younger listeners that don't remember them new, I thought, why have I never seen someone do an XJ Cherokee Comanche mashup where they take the 4-door body shell of the Cherokee, made it with the truck bed and, the back of the cab of a Comanche. They'd have to extend the wheelbase, obviously, et cetera, but how has this not been a SEMA build that I've already seen where someone has made a 4-door Cherokee truck?
Yeah, no, I agree. That seems very ripe for SEMA.
And if you're talking resto mods, like someone could make a business case out of doing something like that. Like how many people would want like a cool? I mean, people are spending $200,000 on 6x6 pickup trucks left and right. Like you don't think someone would spend 70 or 80 grand on a really cool off-road kind of, adventure mobile of a 4-door Cherokee with a Comanche pickup truck bed? I think they absolutely would.
Cool. Well, let's shift gears over to news about the Acura NSX potentially going electric. I think it's definitely a move that would, continue its life. Let's put it that way. There was rumors of this. We reported last week about it. I've driven the NSX in its most recent generation, so it's like, I think it's definitely a thing this is the direction it should go, because I feel like the NSX has always been a little more niche than the Corvette, the Mustang, any other sort of like sports to more like, high performance sports cars. I think they did a great job with it, but I also think they've sort of run out of runway with it. I believe, I think it's John is actually testing one of the final ones in the fleet this week as we speak. So we'll have to talk about that on a podcast coming up. But I think this is a natural progression for it, and I honestly hope they do it, because I think given the footprint of it, electrification would let them maintain what we think of as an NSX as far as styling, interior, sporting attributes without, really changing too much of that. So I think it would be a good move.
Oh, yeah, for sure. On some level, I think one of the reasons... I don't want to say reasons. One of the knocks against the current NSX that's on its way out is that it's complicated. They wanted to capitalize on NSX fame, and instead of going a really simple route, they threw every bit of technology that they had at it, with a hybrid gasoline electric powertrain and incredible performance specs. But does it really have the same soul as the original? A lot of people would argue no. I think getting rid of the internal combustion engine entirely and going with a fully electric drivetrain would allow them to kind of go more simple, and potentially, figure out, because one of the hallmarks of the NSX was its lightweight, and advanced construction methods, and they were able to do with the V6 engine what Ferrari was doing with V8s. So could they do something electrified and kind of recapture some of the awesome performance and simplicity that made the original NSX so desirable? I think that they could. If there's any car company in the world that could engineer such a thing, I would say it'd be Honda. So yeah, I'm all for it. I hope that they do.
Could be a Tesla Roadster fighter with a slightly different approach, but I don't think we're gonna see as many sort of smallish electric coupes for a little bit until automakers sort of figure out how to do that again, because they have bigger priorities. So I think this would be a great move for Acura to launch its sort of electrification strategy with a splash. Mm-hmm. So let's trade over to our drive section. We finally get to some of the stuff we've been driving. I just got out of the GMC Yukon Denali. This is the Ultimate, which means it's basically the Denali plus, plus more, if you will. So it was very nice. Let's put it that way. The sticker was $94,000. That is Escalade territory as far as I'm concerned. Titanium Rush Metallic, which means it's kind of like the deepest of blues. It almost looks black, but then the sun hits it and you're like, okay, there's a little bit of like a bluish purpley in there. Interior is Alpine Umber, which was basically dark with like some sort of like very rich brown wood with like a trim on it, with not trim, but like almost like a pattern. I called it like a topographic sort of look. Check out one of my shortcuts. You can find that on our social feeds. But very nice vehicle. I've been enjoying the new generation, if you will, of these large GM trucks. I tend to think after driving the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Yukon, the bigger Yukon XL, if you will, I tend to feel like I might land on a Yukon over the Chevy versions. I was feeling Chevy like a year or two ago when they first came out, but right now, I don't know, I'm feeling Yukon. And it, does go back and forth with the weather, I suppose. But it's a really, they're also ubiquitous around Metro Detroit, too. It's like you see so many Tahoes and Yukons, a lot of Yukons, it seems like. But I like the headlights up front. This one has a very cool sort of like matte grille on it. And then the 6.2 liter EcoTech 3 V8. So yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of get up and go. These things handle pretty well. You have the latest versions of like StabiliTrak and magnetic ride control. It's a very nice SUV. One of the cool features I'll call out here too is you can actually move the center console. There's a switch right up like above with like the sunroof, the moonroof, operations. And I was doing it. I'm like, why isn't the roof opening? Then I looked out. I'm like, whoa, the center console's moving away from me. So that was pretty cool. These things I think they're expensive, but they are very good values for what you get. These are like, really capable, strong trucks that I think look good. You get a level of prestige with them. They're loaded up with LEDs and all sorts of like, safety and security things. The visibility is great. The one thing I regret, because I couldn't get to it easily, I didn't know this, there was a massaging feature on this. Whenever there's a massaging feature, I like to try it out. I'll close with this. Jeep is the best. Mercedes is kind of in the middle. And there's a number of other ones that don't quite measure up, I think, to a true Jeep massage. They are the best that I think as far as in-car massages. But I regret not trying the GMC one. So, have you driven any of these large trucks lately, or have you just been sticking with your 93, I guess, GMT 400?
I've not, I've driven the latest generation of the GMC utility vehicles. I have not driven a Yukon Denali, let alone a Yukon Denali Ultimate. But man, I'm looking at pictures. That interior is, I mean, that's classy. That's really pretty, well done interior. The outside is pretty ostentatious with the big chrome grille and the huge red GMC right in the middle of it, and kind of bracketed by those LED piped headlights and huge chrome wheels, all that. But man, you get inside and it's just like, I don't know, like I like that. I like that interior a lot.
Yeah, this is, I think, one of the better GMC interiors I have ever been in, which isn't saying much because it's, of course, the newest one. It's the Denali Ultimate. Yes. But, I mean, there was a while where even Cadillacs didn't look like the price that they were charging. I think GM is getting their interiors largely correct, and they look pretty good, especially in these expensive vehicles, especially in the SUVs and trucks.
Have you got experience with the Escalade and its big curved OLED screen?
Yeah, I drove one. Geez, this was earlier in the spring, and it's really quite something.
Yeah.
I'm actually in the EQS, the Mercedes, right now with its expansive screen as well. And, it's like I said, it's really quite something. I feel like different automakers do it better than others. That has been a few months now. Overall, I was impressed with it.
I like that I like the look of Cadillac's OLED screen. OLED in general has like a crispness and a really like bright, beautiful color palette to it, more so than LCD to me. But I don't know, like, is that I really like this GMC Ultimate interior. It's a different take on luxury. Cadillac's kind of going high tech with the Escalade, whereas GMC's kind of pulling it back and going a little more old school American luxury. I don't know, like I'd want to sit in them both and drive them before I picked a winner there.
Yeah, it's tricky. I might veer a little towards Mercedes, but that's only because I got out of it like 4 hours ago, and I just was really taken with it. But it's a little surreal too. I remember when they revealed these things at CES, like just 2 years ago, maybe. I remember that was the theme of CES was car screens. So it's pretty wild to see them in there. I like the OLED technology. I think it's better than it's a better way to sort of serve the user as opposed to some of these like augmented reality things. Or to me, when I look at it, it's like, it's just distracting. It gives me a headache.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like, I don't need to see how tall the buildings are in relation to where I am, I can look outside and see that,
There is such a thing as too much, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's pretty solid.
Nice.
So tell me about, you're finally getting some time in the EV6.
I am.
This is our long-termer. What do you think of it?
I mean, I love this car. I've had it in my driveway for a couple weeks now. I drove it from the Detroit Auto Show down to Columbus, Ohio. I had no issues with range. I made the trip and I had about 40 miles left, even after some detours for food and traffic and all that. So range anxiety has not been any sort of issue for me. I found if anything, its range estimates are erring on the side of being conservative. It'll show that it's got 37 miles. I'll take a 4-mile drive and it'll say 35 miles still. So it's a little conservative, which when you're talking about electricity, electric powered battery operated cars, I think that's the right way to go. I think it is a little bit too stylish. And the reason I say that, they went with this kind of smushed down hatchback look. It's beautiful. It looks amazing in pictures. I walk up to it and I think, man, that is a striking car. I get in it and I'm a little over 6 foot tall, which isn't, I'm not like some huge gargantuan person, but the headroom is a little bit pinchy for me. It's got a glass roof on it that probably cuts down a little bit too, but like I don't know. I actually adjusted my seat back down a little bit more than I typically would. I don't think to a point where it's bothersome, but I don't like the feeling of the tips of my hair follicles touching the ceiling. So yeah, that's my one complaint about the overall design of the vehicle. It could use another inch of headroom. The driving dynamics, zero complaints. Nice punchy electric powertrain. A huge difference between eco mode, normal mode, and sport mode. You put the thing in sport and you immediately feel, a goose from the accelerator. I like nearly everything about it. I'll go on a slight rant here and complain that every recent Hyundai and Kia car that I have had lately has a very overly aggressive rear cross traffic stoppage system. So backing out of my driveway, I'll have plenty of room, to go in the direction I want to go. If it sees a car coming from the other direction, not where I'm actually pulling into, it slams on the brakes. It's done it a couple times already. Our long-term Hyundai Palisade did that. Every Hyundai that I've had, or Kia, which, it's the same company, basically, overly aggressive. That's a legitimate complaint that would irritate me if I own this car, because it happens on a regular basis. The heads-up display isn't the crispest that I have used. It's nice and big, but when it gets out towards the edges of its display on the windshield, it gets a little bit blurry and gives me, my eyes can't quite focus on it. That's a little bit of a complaint that I have with it. But these are fairly minor things. Like if you're listening and you think I'm being picky, you're right. I am being picky. Like the rear cross traffic alert system and the edges of the heads up display, and putting my seat back slightly, so that, I feel like I've got a little bit more headroom. Those are the complaints that I have with the car. I really, really am enjoying it. Lots of commentary from people telling me how pretty it is, asking me lots of questions. And the last thing I'll comment on is the charging infrastructure. I live in a small town northwest of Columbus, Ohio. I have not had an issue whatsoever with charging. If there is a snafu that I've had, it's that I went to one of our local EVgo charging stations, and someone had a Mach-E plugged into the fastest 350 kilowatt charger. I walked into the store, walked out 5 minutes later, and they had hit their 80% and left. So I moved over to that spot, plugged it in, and the 350 kilowatt, it charged from something like 11% to 100% in 36 minutes. And it cost me $12 in energy usage to do that. That is a deal. That's great. It was further proof that, depending on the rates where you live and all of that, driving electric is, it just makes more sense than driving gasoline.
Yeah, it's a couple points there, not to put too fine of a point on this, but I noticed that sort of seating position where it almost feels like, because they're calling it a crossover, even though to me it looks like a car, like one of the sort of the weird things they did is that seating position is just, it's a little higher up than it feels like it needs to be. It offers you better visibility if you're perhaps like, 5'10", 5'11", like I am. If you're like what, 6'2" or something,
yeah,
it gets a little tighter just with even a little bit, a couple more inches of height, So I think that's a tricky situation. And it's the same thing with the stance of the car. It's a couple like millimeters higher than perhaps it could be. I actually we talked about this on the podcast last week. It sort of looks like the Ferrari Purosangue in some ways. Like there's some similarities there going both ways. And, that's a good thing. I think they're both handsome looking crossovers, but I think it could also be a very cool looking sport wagon if you just lowered it. So
yeah, I would opt for that myself. Lower the seats, stop trying to make it a crossover. It's not a crossover. Call it what it is, and give me that extra inch of headroom. I'd appreciate that.
It's interesting. I feel like they could maybe split that up a bit, but I'd say most buyers aren't necessarily like us. They're just going to say it's a crossover. Cool. That's what I want. So,
yeah.
Cool car. I actually have not driven our long-termer yet. I have driven the EV6 multiple times in multiple configurations. I had one, just a month or so ago. It was the one with the kind of matte gray exterior. Super cool looking car. A lot of fun to drive. I think you want to go with all-wheel drive as opposed to rear wheel because it does give you that real like performance vibe.
It is quick. It's legitimately quick.
I like it a little more than the Ioniq 5 too. That's where I would land.
See, I haven't driven the Ioniq yet. I think I probably would go Ioniq if given the choice, because it has slightly more room space inside. The back seat's a little bit bigger, a little bit more cargo space, and it doesn't quite have the headroom limitation that the Kia has. So I think I would err on the side of the Ioniq, but man, the Kia, it just attracts attention because it's so stylish.
Agreed. Well, that's our drive section. Do you have a fall beer there, Jeremy? By the time people get this, it'll probably be October, unless you're listening to it on Friday afternoon. But you have a fall beer that you're quaffing this week?
Yes, I do. I've been drinking some Oktoberfest lately. I just went to Nocterra Brewing in Powell, Ohio, which is south of Delaware where I live, but still it's like north of Dublin, which is a big suburb of Columbus. Nocterra Brewing has an Oktoberfest that was absolutely brilliant. It was a little bit on the lighter side, but super, super good. They also had a stout that was excellent. It was fallish. It was a little mapley, a little bit spicy, and absolutely delicious. In things that you can get more locally, more nationally, When fall weather hits, I go to nut browns. So there's a lot of good nut browns out there. But I really like Sierra Nevada's nut brown. I can't think what the name of it is. But their Moose Drool. Moose Drool is very good. That's not Sierra Nevada, is it? But regardless, Moose Drool is real good. You can get that nationally. And yeah, that's where I'm at on fall beers right now.
Sounds good. I'm with the OG, just the Sam Adams Oktoberfest. I think you can't go wrong with that.
Solid.
It's a really good one. It looks good in the glass. It's just goes down smooth. And one or two of those, that's all you need.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. I love me some Sam Adams Oktoberfest.
All right. So if you enjoy Oktoberfest, and hopefully you enjoy the podcast, please leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get the show. Send us your Spend My Monies. That's podcast@autoblog.com. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next week.